Stop teaching children to read the wrong way. If you want your students to not just decode words, but truly understand them, then this is the video for you. Structured literacy isn't just another buzzword, and it's definitely not just a pendulum swing. It's the future of reading education, and it's going to be important for us all to learn about. Hey there, if you're new here, welcome. And if you're not, welcome back to my channel. My name is DiGilio. I was a primary teacher for 23 years. And on this channel, we dive deep into all things reading and literacy instruction and really getting in deep into the science of reading and how the science of reading will really start to transform lives in education. So today what we're doing is we are tackling the topic that has been misunderstood and probably misrepresented for decades. And I was right there with you. Didn't know about it, didn't understand it either. But it's really about how to effectively teach children to read. Now, you've probably heard about different methods from phonics to whole language to balanced literacy. But today we're going to unravel why structured literacy stands head and shoulders above the rest. And it's not just a better way, it's the best way to teach reading. If you care about equipping the next generation with really the critical skills of reading and decoding, stay tuned because you're not going to want to miss this video. In today's video, we are going to talk about the reasons why structured literacy is so important and how this is how we need to be teaching reading going forward. We're going to be diving into 5 important reasons why structured literacy is the gold standard for how to teach children to read, because it's based on brain science and how the brain actually learns to read. We're going to break down the core principles of structured literacy and its effectiveness, and why it's effective for all students and not just students that have reading difficulties or dyslexia. It is important for all students. And it's time that we rethink our approach. I had to do the same thing. I was a balanced literacy teacher for many, many, many years. My story was a little bit different than I think a typical balanced literacy classroom, but still it was balanced literacy. So I'm here to tell you all about structured literacy and the core principles and how it will be effective for all students. So let's jump into it. Okay, let's start by addressing the cornerstone of structured literacy, which is explicit and systematic instruction. Now, what do we mean by that? Explicit means that the teacher clearly explains and models the key literacy skills. We're talking about breaking down the complex process of reading into little digestible parts. No more expecting students to just pick up reading skills by osmosis. This method ensures that children really understand each component before moving on to the next. Systematic instruction refers to the orderly sequence of instruction. That's important. This is actually the roadmap for teachers, a scope and sequence that ensures we don't put the cart before the horse. For example, students start by mastering simple consonant, vowel, consonant words like tap before advancing and moving on to more complex structures like the word stamp or tapped. It's a building block approach that has proven time and time again to be effective. Teacher-led instruction is central to this, allowing for immediate, pinpointed feedback, another hallmark of structured literacy. A scope and sequence is the most important part of structured literacy. It starts with a scope and sequence. Everything stems from this. The teaching stems from an explicit and systematic scope and sequence. So if you don't have a scope and sequence, or you're not sure what the scope and sequence should be, check below in the description because I have a free scope and sequence for you. So if you don't have one and you're looking for a great one, you could download ours for free from our Structured Literacy with Ease program and use it. Whether or not you use our Structured Literacy with Ease program, you can absolutely still use our scope and sequence because it's explicit and it's systematic and it doesn't miss a beat. It's a very, very well done scope and sequence. And remember, the scope and sequence is the cornerstone of structured literacy. It's where you begin. Everything stems from the scope and sequence. You can't teach structured literacy without it. So definitely check the description below and download our free scope and sequence that you can use in your own classroom or at home with your own children, or if you're a homeschooling parent, it can be used in all those teaching environments. Next up, let's dive into phoneme grapheme level approach of instruction. It's really a very distinctive feature of structured literacy. Basically, in layman's terms, this is all about focusing on the smallest units of sound, which are called phonemes, and their corresponding written symbols, which is the graphemes or the letters. It's like teaching a child to read by giving them the most basic building blocks first and showing them how these building blocks combine to form words. Why is this so crucial? Research shows that this approach is the most effective approach than any other phonics approach out there, using larger units, such as onset and rhyme or word families. The phoneme grapheme approach fosters a meticulous attention to the sequence of letters and words, laying out a really strong foundation for decoding skills. It's not just reading, it's kind of like understanding the DNA of words. It's so, so important. And one of the activities that you can do, which is at that phoneme grapheme level of instruction, is phoneme grapheme mapping. It's a really important part that's bringing in the research into a structured literacy instruction. I have an entire video on phoneme grapheme mapping, but I'm going to do one very, very quickly. It'll take me all of 1 minute. Let's say the students are learning the high frequency word, the. So we'll say to the students, say the word the. Repeat after me, the. Let's tap out the word the and the sounds in the. So there's 2 sounds in the word the. So we're going to move 2 counters up into the blocks. The. What's the first sound you hear in the word the? We hear th. So we're going to say th and move it up. Now I'll say, friends, what letters makes the th sound? And they'll say TH. Now, hopefully at this point, you've already taught this. But again, if you haven't, you can still teach this. Let's say they don't know it. You can say TH makes the th sound. Say th, and you put the TH there. Now we'll say, what's the next sound you hear in the word the? You hear Good. Let's push it up. We hear th. Now, what letter says or represents the sound in the word the? Now, you might have some students say U. Well, you would say, yes, you're right. The U makes the sound. But you want to know something else? All of the vowels, A, E, I, O, and U, make another sound. They all make They all make an sound also. So not only does A make and A, it also says and we call that the schwa sound. You want to just quickly tell them about it. And of course, you want to do a whole lesson on schwa. And in this word, the, we're going to have an E here. And the E makes the sound in the. Now, again, that's the schwa sound because E typically makes the sound or E, but it also makes Now, this is the part we're going to draw a heart under because this is the part we learn by heart. And if you're looking on our high frequency word cards, we also have all of the phoneme grapheme mapping on the back of all of our high frequency word cards. If teachers are new to understanding phoneme grapheme mapping and they don't know how to map them in the correct boxes, we provide that on our high frequency word cards in Structured Literacy with Ease. So it's all laid out for you. So this is how we do phoneme grapheme mapping. You say, this is the part we learn by heart because they have to remember that the E here makes the sound, and it's a schwa. This is phoneme grapheme mapping. It's just a really quick, easy, and effective way of mapping sounds, phonemes, to letters, graphemes. And that's what we're talking about, the phoneme grapheme level of instruction. This is what we're talking about. Because what this does, it actually creates a brain process. The process that's happening in the brain is called orthographic mapping. And orthographic mapping is just a brain function. And it's where the brain is connecting the graphemes or letters and the phonemes, the sounds, and it's connecting them and mapping them together, saying, hey, these match. And then your brain is saying, hey, this string of letters says the. It's actually all happening in the brain. And phoneme grapheme mapping, the activity, allows for orthographic mapping to occur in the brain. So that's what we're talking about, teaching structured literacy through a phoneme grapheme level of instruction. That's what we're talking about here. Next point, why structured literacy works for all students, especially struggling readers. First, let's clear up a common misconception. Structured literacy isn't just for children with dyslexia or who struggle with reading. It's a universally effective method. But yes, explicit and systematic nature of structured literacy is particularly beneficial for those who find reading really challenging. Structured literacy zeroes in on foundational literacy skills that many struggling students lack and offering them a lifeline to literacy. And the teaching is clear, unambiguous, and directly targets the learner's needs, making it a very versatile tool for a diverse classroom. Structured literacy has the power to really level the playing field, making high quality reading instruction accessible to all, which is what we're all striving to do as teachers in the classroom. Point 4, let's talk about the flaws in our current literacy practices. Now, if structured literacy is so effective, you might be asking, why isn't it the standard practice in all schools? Well, the truth is, many educational systems are stuck in the mud with outdated methodologies. And I'd like to talk about a couple of them. I'd like to talk about balanced literacy and the MSV cueing system. Balanced literacy is often touted as kind of like the best of both worlds, combining elements of phonics and whole language approaches. It sounds great on paper, but here's the issue. It often becomes kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none situation. While balanced literacy claims to offer a comprehensive approach, it frequently lacks explicit and systematic instruction that students really, especially struggling students, need. It basically kind of dilutes the focus on phonics and decoding, which are critical for early literacy development. Let's just start with a quick side note. I was a balanced literacy teacher for 23 years. I was teaching through a flawed method. Knowing that and learning what I've learned over the last 3 years, it's kind of heartbreaking to me, to be honest, that I was teaching through this flawed way of teaching for so long. However, I believe I was teaching it a little bit differently maybe than most. And I don't know, maybe this is the case for many teachers. Let me tell you why. When I first started teaching 23 years ago, I was teaching in a school that was very heavily phonics based, very isolated skills phonics instruction. It was like worksheets and phonics and very little reading, interestingly enough. And the next year, I moved to another school in the district because unfortunately that happened a lot when you were a new teacher. I moved to another school in the district and it was whole language. And phonics was like, woo. It was like a curse word. You couldn't say it. When I quickly realized that whole language was not going to work because I was teaching children to read through a whole word reading approach, I was sitting with my students and I was like, okay, wait a second. If they can't sound out the words on the page, how are they going to learn to read? How are they going to read these words if they don't know the sounds in the words? By the second month of that school year, I quickly learned that phonics needed to be part of my instruction. And that was when I think my instruction changed for the better throughout my entire career, because I always taught with phonics and I always taught with phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. I always included these pieces of literacy instruction into my instruction because I think I was one of the lucky ones. I taught through an isolated phonics approach and then I taught through whole language, and I knew that whole language wasn't going to work. Whole language morphed into balanced literacy, which brought in phonics and whole word reading. But for me, I always did word building and what we now know as word chaining. I was already doing that in my classroom. I always included phonics in my instruction. But what was missing was an explicit and systematic scope and sequence. I didn't know I needed to have this explicit way of teaching the phonic sounds and be very clear and systematic on the way I taught each phonic sound. I didn't know that back then. So that was definitely missing from my instruction. Another kind of problem in the balanced literacy world is the use of the MSV cueing system. Now, this is one of the biggest problems with balanced literacy. And to be honest, in my mind, balanced literacy has become synonymous with MSV queuing system. I don't really agree with that. I think the MSV queuing system was a part of it, but it's not what balanced literacy was in and of itself. There were so many parts of balanced literacy that I thought were wonderful. The shared reading and the shared writing and the big books and all of those other parts were amazing parts of a structured literacy classroom. But MSV, in my mind, has become synonymous with balanced literacy. What the MSV queuing system, what it basically was a system that encourages students to use meaning, structure, and visual cues to identify words. For example, if a child comes across a difficult word, they might look at the pictures on the page and think about what word would make sense in the sentence. Now, while that might seem like a really useful skill, it's problematic for a couple of reasons. First, it encourages guessing, which is not a sustainable strategy for reading. Second, it sidesteps the crucial skill of decoding, which is the backbone of true reading proficiency. Both of these methods, balanced literacy and using the MSV queuing system, might produce students who appear to read well on the surface. But dig a little deeper and you'll find that these students often lack the foundational skills needed for advanced literacy tasks. And let's face it, for life, we need to equip not only our teachers with methodologies that are rooted in evidence and effectiveness, but we've got to prepare our students. And structured literacy does just that. We make sure that it's not just an alternative, but it's an imperative for effective education. The last part of this video is on the urgency that we need to change the landscape of education. We need to change. Our instruction needs to change. 65% of American fourth graders read below the proficient level. This isn't just a number, it's a crisis, and it has far-reaching implications for our society. And structured literacy isn't just an alternative method, it's an imperative. This is about more than grades and test scores. It's about equipping our children for life. Virtually all teachers want to be effective with their students. And structured literacy provides the roadmap that makes this possible. The time for change is now. And the tool that's going to change and make this change is structured literacy. So now what we need to do is we need to empower each other. We need to empower each other and start to make these changes and shifts in our classroom. And what you'll find all over my channel on YouTube here is these shifts that we need to make in our instruction. And we need to start with structured literacy. And again, you could watch all of my other videos to start that process of moving away from balanced literacy and moving towards structured literacy. That's what we need to do for our students. So we've gone through the ins and outs of why structured literacy is the gold standard for teaching reading, from its explicit and systematic approach to the urgent need to rethink how we're teaching our kids, and we've covered it all. But knowing is just half the battle. If you're a teacher, an educator looking to implement these effective strategies, I've got something special for you. Click the link down below in the description for my free scope and sequence, and it was designed to help you lay out a very explicit and systematic roadmap for teaching reading, setting both you and your students up for success. Definitely check out that free scope and sequence below. It's there for you to help you start your journey into structured literacy. So if you found value in this video, and I hope you did, please don't forget to click that subscribe button and that little bell next to it. Share it out with educators. Let's start making a difference one child at a time. I'm with you. I'm here with you on this journey. So thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Happy teaching.